Thank you, Marian, and it's a pleasure to be here. I'm Jan Vandeburie. I'm a medieval historian working on the medieval Mediterranean and the Islamic world. And at the Woolf, I work on a project on shared sacred space. Broadly defined, shared sacred space, but specifically my focus is on the 12th and 13th century Levant, the time of sort of conflict like the Crusade, but also intense pilgrimage from Western Europe to the Middle East and to shrines there. I'll briefly talk about sort of a case study and a few bigger questions to give you an idea of what I do. The whole idea started when I was looking into the writings of a European bishop who went to the Holy Land in crusading times. And he wrote about sort of what he found, the holy places, the people, everything going on there. And about a fairly unknown Marian shrine in Tortosa, today Tartus at the coast of Syria, he wrote that there's a chapel there in which the Lord makes many miracles, not just for Christians, but even to the Saracens, so the Muslims. And I was kind of intrigued by that sort of little note saying, even to the Muslims. Because in fact, as we all know, they would have been sharing shrines already for centuries, especially between Eastern and Eastern Christians and Muslims. But as a Western Christian, for him that was something special, clearly. But that wasn't the only account from around that time. And then this is what I'm doing now, kind of on this aspect at least, collecting accounts. There's a few of these, they've been looked at in scholarship quite a bit. For example, the Almataria garden with the Tree of the Virgin. It's a famous kind of Marian shrine, in fact recently been revamped by the Egyptian government. Or the Saidnaya monastery in Syria. And these places, sort of the Western accounts that emphasize the sharing between Muslims and Christians, is in a kind of 20-year time, really kind of pop up. They really emphasize this in various accounts, various authors, separately independent. So why is this? Why at that time? Because again, they would have been doing this for a while already. And this is another example. Sorry, this is Saidnaya, another one of those accounts. So what had changed? First of all, the late 12th century in Europe saw a big increase in Marian devotion. The cult of Mary really took off, and as Mira Rubin already pointed out, because of the Holy Land links with the crusading context, people went there, sort of all these Marian shrines, they could visit them, and then they came back with relics, with stories, and that really kind of accelerated the cult of Mary in Europe. It still doesn't explain why at that time things kind of kick off so much and not earlier in the crusading times. The second aspect then that comes in is the impact of the Latin Quran. By the late 12th century, Peter the Venerable's project from the mid-12th century had reached the kind of Parisian colleges, the Parisian universities, where these theologians, people that wrote most of those accounts, were trained. These bishops, these kind of preachers, and so on. This is Jacques de Vitry, the same guy that wrote the first quote about Tortosa, where he sort of says that I've read this in their book called the Quran. So he quotes the Quran in his writings there. And there's more of these kind of links. The first manuscript actually of the Latin Quran that we have, the earliest extant copy, is from a Parisian context, and we have several of these kind of later friars as well, literally saying, I've read this in the Quran, when they talk about Mary in Islam. And then we have things like Dominican, they call it the Monte Croce's copy of the Quran with Latin commentaries. So I've tried to put this into a bit of a schedule. So what we have is, first, we have the increase of the cult of Mary. Combine that with the knowledge of the Quran. Of course, we all know that in the Quran, Mary is a huge figure. She's mentioned more than in the New Testament. She has her own 2 surahs. So for these people to discover that Mary is such a huge figure, that was a big thing. So these two combined lead to an increased interest of Mary in Islam, but also of Muslims at Marian shrines. So these people that sort of know about this, they're the ones that will be going to the Holy Land on whatever kind of purpose, as a preacher, as a missionary, as a churchman. And they will have a specific interest in Muslims at these shrines and write about it. And these writings are not just any kind of high theological writing, they're actually very popular writings. Pilgrimage accounts, material for sermons, for preaching. And these writings make it back into Europe and really then kind of emphasize the popularity of Mary. So she is seen as a kind of super saint in a way, you know, even the Muslims sort of, you know, she does even miracles for the Muslims. Even the Muslims kind of believe in Mary. And that's the kind of, you know, thing that really then kicks off by the late 12th century and early 13th century, the cult of Mary in Europe and until, you know, for centuries to come, obviously. And then a final kind of example as a, you know, sort of a closing bit of evidence on the first quote I put there about Tortosa in Syria. This is from the Cantiga Santa Maria, one of those results of the popular cult of Mary in Europe, from Western Mediterranean, at least in Spain. The Cantigas are a collection of stories about Mary, miracle stories with lovely images, like a storybook. And one of them is about Tortosa. And the story goes that it's made by obviously Western people. The story goes that the city was besieged by the Sultan, a Mamluk Sultan who thought they were very, you know, defended. And he attacks the city, but he finds that suddenly it's defended by a bunch of a whole army of white knights, heavenly knights. He doesn't know why, but then he sort of realizes that they have a shrine of Mary in the city. And then we have the image of the Sultan sitting there with the Quran and sort of pointing out, look, you know, Mary in the Quran, this is why we can't attack the city, and instead they go and give gifts to Mary. But the fact that this is made by Western Christians, that they, you know, make an image of the Sultan showing Mary in the Quran is the kind of, you know, is the clue really. So thank you. If you want to know more, there's a lovely special issue out recently of Al-Mazak with all things linked to this project. Thank you.